Hello and welcome to the quiz 1.03 review on approximating solutions with graphs. We're going to go ahead and get started with question number 1. All right, so it says to graph the system of equations. Now, if you remember from class, we talked about how you need to be able to recognize the type or the form that each equation is given to you. So there's two forms. We have our standard form, which is when we're given ax plus by equals c, when we have both variables on one side of the equation and then the constant on the other. And then we have our slope-intercept, which we did a lot with last semester, and that's your y equals mx plus b. Okay, so for standard form, we're going to find the intercepts to graph. And then for slope-intercept form, you are going to use your slope, your m, and your b, your y-intercept to graph. So if we look at this system here, you should hopefully be able to recognize that we are in standard form. I'll go ahead and change my ink color here. Okay, so if we're graphing the system of equations, we're going to go ahead and take that first equation and find our intercepts. So to find my x-intercept, we want to let y equals 0. So I'm going to take 2x minus 0, I'm substituting in 0 for y, equals 4, and then I'm going to solve. So if we add or subtract 0 to anything, it doesn't change the value, so I'm just going to cancel that out. So 2x equals 4, we divide both sides by 2, and x is just going to equal, x is just going to equal 2. Oh, come on. Sorry about this. There we go. All right, so then my y-intercept. For my y-intercept, we're going to let x equal 0. So I'm plugging in 0 for x, and then we're going to solve for y. 2 times 0 is 0, so this is all going to cancel. That's always how this works when we're finding our intercepts. I'm left with negative y equals 4. Now remember, when we have a variable that doesn't have a number in front of it, it really means there's a 1. Okay, so that's a negative 1y. So to get y by itself, we're going to divide both sides by negative 1, and our y-intercept is going to be at negative 4. So I'm going to go ahead and graph those two intercepts. So if I graph the intercept of x equals 2, I go to the x-axis and I graph at x equals 2. For my y-intercept, I go to the y-axis and I look for negative 4, and here is my point for negative 4. Now I can go ahead and I can graph the line. Now when you're doing this in the OHS, you are simply going to click on x equals 2, and you're going to click where it says y equals negative 4. And when you do that, it's going to draw in a nice line for you. So you won't have to worry about being quite as neat as I am trying to be so that things match up for us. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and graph our next line. So my equation was x minus 3y equals negative 3. So if I want to find my x-intercept, remember we let y equal 0, so x minus 3 times 0 equals negative 3. This is going to cancel because anything times 0 is 0, so x just equals negative 3. That one was nice and simple. And then, if I want to find my y-intercept, there we go. I'm going to let x equals 0. So 0 minus 3y equals negative 3. It's going to cancel. Negative 3y equals negative 3. We divide both sides by negative 3. And y is going to equal positive 1 because a negative divided by negative gives me a positive. So I can go ahead and graph those intercepts. So my first intercept is at x equals negative 3. You're going to click on that point, and then you're going to click on y equals 1. And the OHS is going to nicely go ahead and just put that point in for you. Okay, and I'm attempting to draw a straight line, as straight as I can anyways. All right, so clearly I didn't do that great of a job because I'm way off from what I'm supposed to be. So I'm going to go ahead and try and fix this bottom one a little bit here. This is supposed to come up more like right through here. There we go. So the reason I knew that is because I kind of worked ahead here, and in Desmos, I pre-graphed these lines just to make sure that when I'm graphing them by hand, I was doing an okay job. But it's hard when you don't have a straight line to do this. So if you're doing this by hand at all, make sure that you use a ruler or a like the edge of a book to actually draw your lines in. That way you know you're getting the accurate lines. So I want to look to see where that point of intersection is. So here that point is at 3, 2. That is my solution. Okay, that's where those two lines intersect. But you just have to graph them using the OHS. So click on your intercepts. The lines will be graphed for you. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to question number 2. So here it says to graph the system of equations on your graph paper to answer the question. So they want you to try to do these by hand. So I'm going to show you how to do them by hand, and then down here, this is my check in Desmos. So if I look at this system, notice this system is in slope-intercept form. So if I look at this first line here, slope-intercept form, all we need to identify is my slope and my y-intercept. It's a little bit easier in terms of the amount of work involved to graph these. So my slope, there's nothing in front of the x, which means there's a 1. So my slope is 1. Now, if you remember, whenever we have a whole number, we always put it over 1, because if you remember, our slope is rise over run. So my slope is 1 over 1, and then my b, I'm going to write this up here just in case someone's forgotten it, y equals mx plus b, that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about slope-intercept form. Okay, my slope, or my y-intercept is going to be 8. That's where it crosses the y-axis. So if I go to graph this first line, I'm going to go over to y equals 8. There's my y-intercept, and then my slope is up 1 over 1. Up 1 over 1. So here is my first line, and I'm going to try to do that as best as I can. If you're doing this by hand, you printed out the sheet we file transferred with you to go ahead and practice these. Make sure you use that ruler or the edge of the book to help you do this accurately. I also recommend using Desmos to check your work, but it is important that you know how to graph these by hand because you'll need to know how to for your EOC in April. Okay, so the next line, go ahead and switch colors here. So this one right here, same process. We want to identify my slope. Again, I don't have a number out front of x, so that means I really have a 1. So that's going to be -1, and we put that over 1 for my rise over run. And then my y-intercept is going to be at -2 this time. So we always graph that y-intercept first, go down to -2, and then my slope is down 1 over 1, down 1 over 1. And then we can go ahead and graph this one. Okay, so that is my attempt at a straight line. And we can see here that my point of intersection, the solution, it appears to be about right here, which would be at -5, 3. And if I look down at Desmos, that's exactly what we got. So I did an okay job this time graphing. I'm going to write that in a little bit brighter of a color so we can see that better. Okay, so that's my solution. Keep in mind that in your solution, this first point is your x, the second is your y. So if it asks you for the x coordinate, your x coordinate is that first value and your y coordinate is the second value. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to question number 3. This one is similar to what we just did. It says to graph the system of equations on graph paper. So we're going to go ahead and set this up just like we did question number 1. Notice that these two are both in standard form, so we need to find our intercepts. Okay, so to start, okay, so for this first equation, we're going to go ahead and find our x-intercept, which means we let y equals 0. So 2x minus 3 times 0 equals 12. 3 times 0 is 0, that cancels. 2x equals 12. Divide both sides by x to get x by itself, and x is going to equal 6. So there's my x-intercept. That's where it crosses the x-axis, so that would be my first point. Then I'm going to do the same thing for my y-intercept, but I'm going to let x equal 0 this time. So 2 times 0 minus 3y equals 12. 2 times 0 is 0, that cancels. Negative 3y equals 12. We want to get rid of that negative 3, so we're going to divide both sides by negative 3, and y is going to equal negative 4. So I'm going to go to the y-axis and down to negative 4. So we have our first line graphed. Okay, now that we've done the first one, we can go ahead and do our second one. I'm going to actually do this one up here so I have a little bit more room. So for my x-intercept, we let y equal 0, so 2x plus 0 equals 4. That plus 0 is not going to change the value. So 2x equals 4, get x by itself, so we divide both sides by 2, and x is going to equal positive 2. So on the x-axis, I'm finding the x-intercept where it crosses, so x equals 2. Same process for y-intercept, but we let x equals 0. So 2 times 0, that's going to cancel. So I'm just left with y equals 4. There's nothing to simplify there. Y equals 4. I'm going to go ahead and plot that point. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to draw. Again, use straight edge, a ruler, something to help you out when you're doing this. Okay, so my line is off a little bit because I don't have access to a straight edge when I'm using PowerPoint like this. Oh, come on. There we go. Let's see if I can make this do what it's supposed to do. All right, there we go. So this is actually how my line's supposed to look. More like that. And here is my solution, that point of intersection. So as you can see, I went over 3 on the x-axis and down 2. And if you're doing this by hand, use Desmos just to double check. So 3, negative 2. Okay, the quadrant location. If you remember that your first quadrant is your top right, and then we move counterclockwise. So your second quadrant is going to be your top left. We move down to your third quadrant, and this is our fourth and last quadrant. So we can see that our solution in this case was in our fourth quadrant. Our x-coordinate was the 3, and then our y-coordinate was the negative 2. So this just breaks it down a little bit more. Your multiple choice options are going to ask you about the quadrant location and then your coordinates specifically rather than just the solution. Okay, so we have 2 questions left. Let's go ahead and move over to question number 4. So in question 4, it asks us for a system of, or it tells us that a system of linear equations is already graphed for us. So this is kind of nice. They give us the graph and it asks us which ordered pair is the best estimate for the solution. So usually when it says estimate, you're probably going to be dealing with a decimal. So I want to look to see where these two lines cross. Where is that solution? So if I look at my x-axis, notice that I'm coming over here. This is going to be, here's -5, -6, -7. So my x-coordinate is going to be at -7. Now my y-coordinate, if I come down 1, 2, it looks to be about right in the middle. So I would estimate this at -2.5. So the best estimate that I would give is -7, -2.5. You're going to have multiple choice, so you'll be able to, let's say the answer was -2.6. You'll be able to look at that and see that -2.5 is really close to that, and you can pick that answer instead. Okay, so number 4 should be quick for you, nice and easy. And then question number 5. So it says to use a graphing tool to solve the system. So we're going to go ahead and use Desmos for this one. And I'm going to show you how I would do this. I'm going to pull up Desmos really quick. And I'm going to type in the 2 equations. So 3x plus 4y equals 8. And then 4x minus 7y equals -7. Okay, so I have those up. Now I'm going to look here at where they cross. So you can see when if you select one of the 2 lines, it already plots that point of intersection for you, the solution. And if you click on it, it gives you the coordinates. You're probably going to be rounding to 1 decimal. You'll have to read the directions if they ask you to the nearest integer or to the nearest decimal. So I would go ahead and then summarize this one by saying, let's see, what was that? So negative, or I would say 0.08 comma 1.4 would be my final answer for this one. So let me bring this back up quick. So 0.8 comma 1.4. Once I graph those and I rounded to the nearest decimal. So that's how you use Desmos, just so you can just type those in. You don't even have to solve them when we're using the graphing tool. But again, I would really practice doing these by hand instead of just using Desmos so that you get really good at graphing and you're all ready for that EOC come April. All right, so that wraps up our 1.03 quiz review. Good luck on your first quiz for the semester. And if you have any other questions, we'll see you in Raise Your Grade.